إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد فإن أحسن الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. أما بعد. First of all, brothers, if any one of you has some room in front of him, please move forward, make some room for the brothers that just came in. This Friday is the last Friday of this blessed month. It just started not too long ago and it's already gone. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept our good deeds that we did in this month and forgive any shortcomings that we had. And of course, at the end of every Ramadan, there is a zakat, type of zakat that is legislated. That's called Zakatulfitr. So what is Zakatulfitr? The word zakat is connected to al-fitr because it is related to breaking the fast. It is related to breaking the fast. So this Zakatulfitr becomes obligatory at the end of Ramadan. Why was Zakatulfitr legislated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because we have to understand the reasoning behind the legislation so that we can know how to practice this legislation. Zakatulfitr, as Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma said, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam made Zakatulfitr obligatory as a means of purifying the fasting person from the idle talk and foul language that he may have done during his fast, and also to feed the poor. So whoever pays this Zakatulfitr before the Eid Salat, then it is an accepted Zakatulfitr. But whomever pays it after Salat al-Eid, then it is only considered a normal charity, and he has not done his job as far as paying Zakatulfitr. Purifying here in the hadith of Ibn Abbas means purifying the soul of the one who has fasted Ramadan. Foul language, as Ibn al-Athir explained it, means obscene speech, because sometimes when a person is fasting because he doesn't have enough sugar in his system, he may get angry faster and he may curse or say some foul language. This is something that happens to many people. So this Zakatulfitr is purification for this type of behavior that of course a person should refrain from, because fasting is not only fasting from food and sexual behavior, it's also fasting from all idle talk and evil practices. It's a means to practice good behavior. It's to train yourself on self-control. So Ramadan is a chance for a person to exercise and practice self-control that he can apply in the rest of the year. Now, feeding the poor, here the food refers to what is edible, what can be eaten. Now, whomever pays it before the Eid Salat, then it is an accepted Zakatulfitr that is mandated on him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if it is paid after Salatul Eid, it's a normal sadaqah. And it was said that this Zakatulfitr is the meaning of the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-A'la, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ فَصَلَّى. Those who purify themselves, تَزَكَّى, those who purify themselves will prosper, and they also glorify the name of their guardian Lord. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz and Abu al-Aliya said, he, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Prophet sallam, paid Zakatulfitr when he went out for the Salatul Eid. So the Prophet sallam paid Zakatulfitr when he went out for Salatul Eid, but before offering Salatul Eid. Waqi' ibn al-Jarrah said, Zakatulfitr for the month of Ramadan is like the two sajda of forgetfulness for the Salat, sajda saw. So as we know, sometimes if you're praying and then you're not sure if you subtracted or added something that is not a pillar of the salat, then you make that up with sujood al-sahw, with the two sajda of forgetfulness, either before salam or after salam. So Zakatulfitr, as Waqi' said, serve the purpose of sujood al-sahw in the prayer. Is Zakatulfitr obligatory? The correct view is that it is fard, it is obligatory. Because Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu said, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made Zakatulfitr obligatory. And also because of the consensus of the scholars. So it is mandatory to pay the Zakatulfitr. Now when should we pay Zakatulfitr? Zakatulfitr becomes obligatory when the sun sets on the last day of Ramadan. So if Ramadan has 29 days, after we have fasted the 29th day of Ramadan, the sun has set, we have seen the crescent moon of Shawwal. At that point, it has become obligatory on the person who has fasted to pay the Zakatul Fitr. So in other words, if he dies before Salatul Eid, his estate has to pay for him the Zakatul Fitr. So anyone who gets married or has a baby that is born to him or becomes a Muslim before the sun sets on the last day of Ramadan, Zakatul Fitr becomes obligatory on him. But if these things happen after the sun sets of the last day of Ramadan, then it's not obligatory. But of course, when we say obligatory, then if a person does it, it's actually a good charity that a person can do. Now, who should pay Zakatul Fitr? Zakatul Fitr is obligatory on Muslims. Okay, Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu said that the Prophet ﷺ said, Zakatul Fitr is 1 sa' of dates or 1 sa' of barley, obligatory on the Muslims, whether they are slave or free, male or female, young or old. So a sa' is 4 mudud. This is a mud. So 4 of these is a sa'. Okay, so of course the weight is going to be different based on the product that we're talking about. A sa' of dates, 4 of these, 4 handfuls of dates is not going to equal the weight of 4 handfuls of barley, right? But the scholars have estimated that to be around 3 kilos. Al-Shafi'i, may Allah have mercy on him, said, the hadith of Nafi' indicates that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made it obligatory only on the Muslims, the Zakat al-Fitr, which is in accordance with the Book of Allah, because he has made zakat as a purification for the Muslims. And purification can only be for the Muslims. In other words, Zakat al-Fitr is not obligatory on a non-Muslim. So if a Muslim person has under his care and is spending on a non-Muslim, let's say a child or he's caring for a non-Muslim, regardless of how he is responsible for his spending on him, he doesn't have to pay Zakat al-Fitr on this non-Muslim. Okay, because usually if someone is under your care and they don't have their own money to pay Zakat al-Fitr, you need to pay on their behalf. But if the person under your care is not a Muslim, then you don't need to pay on them. So, for example, if your wife is a non-Muslim, is one of the people of the book that is allowed for you to get married to, with the conditions stipulated in the Quran, then you don't have to give Zakat al-Fitr on her because she's not a Muslim. So Shafi'i continues saying, everyone who at the beginning of Shawwal has enough food for himself, in other words, who is Zakat al-Fitr obligatory on? It is obligatory on everyone who at the beginning of Shawwal has enough food for that day of Eid, and in addition to that has this sa' of food more than his need, which is in our case, that's everyone. So in other words, if a person is poor, right, and on the day of Eid, after the last day of Ramadan, he does not even have, a sa' for his own family to eat on the day of Eid, then he doesn't have to pay Zakat al-Fitr. But if he has enough food to eat on the day of Eid, and beyond that he has a sa' of food, then he needs to give Zakat al-Fitr. Even he may be a recipient of Zakat al-Fitr because he is poor, but it's obligatory on him because he has more than what he needs on the day of Eid. Okay, we're not talking about a year or a month or something, on the day of Eid. This is the stipulation as to who needs to pay Zakat al-Fitr. And Nawawi, may Allah have mercy on him, said, the one who is in financial difficulty, that means he does not have more than a sa' on the day of Eid, is not obligated to give Zakat al-Fitr. Is not obligated to give Zakat al-Fitr. There is no difference among the scholars in this regard. The obligation is determined whether or not a person can afford it. So what does afford it mean? He says, whomever has 1 sa' of food, more than what he needs for himself and those whom he supports on the night and day of Eid, then he gives zakat. So if he has more than what he needs to eat for him and his family members on day of Eid, if he has more than that for that one day, then he has to give Zakatulfitr. So of course, the Muslims should give Zakatulfitr on his behalf and behalf of the people that he cares for. Now, if the people you care for have their own money, it's best for them to pay from their own money. So if your wife has her own money, it's best for her to pay Zakatulfitr from her own money. If she does not, then you need to pay for her. Shafi'i said, who I say is obligated to give Zakat al-Fitr if a child is born to him, or he takes possession of a slave, or someone becomes one of his dependents at any time during the last day of Ramadan. Then the sun sets on the night of the crescent of Shawwal, then he has to give Zakat al-Fitr on that person's behalf. As we said before, when the sun sets on the last day of Ramadan, then you see, if you have a new baby that's born to you before the sun sets, if you get married, things like that, then it becomes mandatory. Of course, it's not obligatory to give Zakat al-Fitr on a fetus. If the woman is pregnant with a fetus, it's not mandatory. But of course, if you give it, again, we're talking here about roughly 3 kilos of flour or rice. It's not a big deal. But it's not mandatory to give Zakat al-Fitr on a fetus that's not born. If someone dies and Zakat al-Fitr is obligatory on him, then money has to be paid from his estate for Zakat al-Fitr. If a servant has set wages, for example, an employee, does an employer have to pay Zakat al-Fitr on his employee? The answer is no. The answer is no. The master has to pay Zakat al-Fitr on his slave. But an employee is not a slave. He has wages, so the employer does not have to pay Zakat al-Fitr on his employee. Now, the amount of Zakat al-Fitr. The amount of Zakat al-Fitr, as we said in the hadith, is 1 sa' of food. So we said sa' is 4 mudud, is 4 of these handfuls. Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiallahu anhu said, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, we used to give it in the form of sa' of food. This was narrated in Al-Bukhari. Now the weight of sa', as we said, can be different from different types of food, and the correct scholarly opinion is that it does not have to be only dates or barley, as the hadith says. It can be from the staple food of the country. So different countries have different main foods. Some people eat bread, some people eat rice, some people eat meat, things like that. So you choose the food of the country that you are in. If you can, brothers, make some more room for the brothers that are coming in. أقول ما تسمعون وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله وكفى والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى. أما بعد, to whom should we give Zakat al-Fitr? If there are no poor people in the area where we live in, or those that will take it do not really need it and will not eat it, but instead they will take that and sell it at half price and take the money, and or if it is difficult to find poor people in the country that we are living in, then it's permissible to send the money outside the country for someone to give it to poor people, like back from wherever each one of us comes from. So the question now is, as we said, the Zakat al-Fitr becomes due on the last day of Ramadan, and it has to be paid before Salat al-Eid. So it's a short time where a person can give out Zakat al-Fitr. But of course, the companions used to take out Zakat al-Fitr 1 or 2 days before Salat al-Eid. So it's allowed for you to pay Zakat al-Fitr 1 or 2 days before Salat al-Eid. Now, what if, for example, I send the hawala and it takes, for example, a week to get there? Am I able to do that? Yes, you're able to send the money way ahead of time, maybe even in the beginning of Ramadan, back to some person in your home country. But then the important thing is you tell him, don't give this Zakat al-Fitr to the poor people until it's due, until 2 or 1 day before Salat al-Eid. So you can send the money ahead of time, even up to a month, but the person who receives it should not give it to the poor people yet. He should keep the money until it's time to give it. As we said, 1 or 2 days before Zakat al-Fitr. maybe there's some room here. My brothers can move up a little bit. Now, the other thing is, if you send money overseas, whatever fees you are charged, do you subtract that from Zakatulfitr? The answer is no. So the money has to reach the person who, according to the correct scholarly opinion, should not give it in cash to the poor people. Some scholars said that it's okay to give Zakatulfitr in cash, like Imam Abu Hanifa. And also Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah chose this opinion. But the three other madhabs, Maliki, Shafi'i, and Imam Ahmad, they say that the sunnah is to give this Zakatulfitr in the form of food instead of money. Especially nowadays, if you give Zakatulfitr as money, because of the disease that is in the hearts of the Muslims, called al-wahan, the love of dunya, even if a person drives Benzes and has villas, he will still take the money from you, because the hearts are hungry nowadays. So it's better to give it in the form of food, so that only those who need it will take this zakat. So the opinion of Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah is that the Zakatulfitr has to be in the staple food of the country. It does not necessarily have to be barley or dates, as the hadith says. And as we said, as far as giving it cash, it's better not to. Okay. The last thing about this subject is who should receive Zakatulfitr. Who should receive Zakatulfitr? There's two different scholarly opinions. One scholarly opinion is that the 8 types of people mentioned in Surah At-Tawbah who are allowed to receive zakat in money are the ones who can receive Zakatulfitr. إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والغارمين, until the end of the ayah. So 8 types. This is the majority of the scholars. But other scholars, such as Ibn Taymiyyah, chose the opinion that it should exclusively be for the poor and the needy. For the poor and the needy. Because this zakat is in a form of food. So obviously the one who owes money or the one who's in jail is not going to use this zakat. He's not going to be able to use it. So the correct opinion, Allah knows best, is that this Zakatulfitr is to be given to the poor and needy only. So to sum it up, the Zakatulfitr has to be given out to the poor people at most 2 days before Salat al-Eid. Salat al-Eid in the country of the person where a person fasts. So for example, if here in Canada, for example, we may have Salat al-Eid 1 day ahead of, let's say, Somalia, right? So the Zakat al-Fitr has to be given to the poor people in Somalia before we pray Salat al-Eid. Even they may still be fasting. Okay, now the question is, do you give the money for the price of 3 kilos in the country where you fasted and where you live in, or the country where the per person is? The correct opinion, Allah's best, is that it's the country of destination, because the hadith says a sa' to the poor person. So the poor person is in country A, so you have to use the measure of country A, but it has to be given to him before you pray your Salatul Eid. And as we said, some scholars said it's okay to give it as money, but the correct opinion is that it's better to give it in food. And it's roughly, as we said, 3 kilo of the staple food of that country. Now again, this is the last Friday of Ramadan. We have to reflect on how we invested this past month. Did you just sleep it through so that it passes because we're too hungry to be awake, or did we invest this month in order for us to gain good behavior, train ourselves on good practices, and get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because as we know, in this month, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala frees many people from hellfire. The major shayateen are imprisoned so that they don't bother the people, so that's easier for us to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make the best day of our deeds the last ones, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make the best day of our existence the day that we meet Him. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us, Prophet Muhammad in the highest paradise of Firdaus. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept all of our good deeds and forgive all of our bad deeds. أقول ما تسمعون وقوموا إلى صلاتكم.